Okay, so now that we have considered two different types of markets, the market for private goods and products and the market for labor, we're going to consider our third type of market, our third situation, which we're going to have both suppliers and demanders. And this market is going to be the market for when what is actually traded is money, and it's money over time. So we're going to think of the suppliers of money being those who are saving, and the demanders of money being those who are taking out loans. So I think that this video is important because in your professional lives, if you understand this content, you'll be able to make more efficient investment and borrowing decisions. You'll be able to anticipate when lower interest rates may be on the horizon for a home or auto loan. You may think of when is a better time to invest more money into a savings account versus use it on everyday consumption. When we think about making the world a better place, hopefully this video can help you more effectively utilize all intertemporal resources at your disposal to help current and future generations. You're going to need to make decisions about how much to spend at a current time versus how much to spend in the future, especially if you're drawing on an endowment of sorts, which would be able to pay for benefits in the future, but could also be used to pay for benefits in the current time period. And importantly, we also need to be able to differentiate a money market from a private goods market and a labor market. So with that in mind, let's consider some similarities in these types of markets. So by now, the supply and demand framework should start to look pretty familiar. That, as we can see, we have a quantity on the horizontal axis, and this time we're just going to keep that as a Q. And on the vertical axis, we have the price of money. How does that really work? So this is going to be represented by an interest rate. So instead of having a P, we're going to focus on that R there. We're going to have the interest rate is what's on the vertical axis. So this is the price that we're paying to part with some of our money now, the price that we're expected to receive when we are able to recapture that money in our savings, or the price which we're paying to demand money now, being the premium which we're willing to pay on that same amount of money than if we would have waited to get it in the future. So we have our L-shaped axis, we have it labeled with price on the vertical, quantity on the horizontal. We have an upward sloping supply of money curve, which is going to be our savings, and a downward sloping demand of money, which is going to be our loans and credit. So we face the same equilibrating forces that we see in labor markets and private goods markets, where if the interest rate is too high, then there's going to be too much quantity supplied of money and not enough quantity demanded. There's going to be more people willing to save and less people willing to or demanding any sort of loan. And so since there's going to be not enough households or companies or individuals requesting credit at that rate, that would put downward pressure on interest rates, and they would reach a point low enough where we have our equilibrium interest rate, which would set the quantity of capital, of financial capital demanded and quantity of financial capital supplied equal. Same thing would happen when we have a shortage of credit, which would then place upward pressure on interest rates such that the quantity demanded would decrease in response to those higher interest rates. Importantly here, we should note that when we're considering shifts and movements along the money supply and money demand curves, we're going to think of a change in interest rates not as impacting the entire supply and demand curves and not shifting them, because it's not one of the market forces which would lead to a shift of the entire curve, but it's going to change the quantity demanded and quantity supplied at a given price or at a given interest rate. So if we start off at equilibrium, for example, and interest rates decrease, they move down to R1, then we're going to see a decrease in the quantity of financial capital of money supplied and an increase in quantity demand, an increase in the amount of loans which are requested. But we are not going to see a shift in either the supply or the demand curve. So as you'll notice on this list of both the market forces which lead to a shift in the demand for money and a shift in the supply of money, we're going to focus heavily here on confidence and expectations. So similar to a market for private goods, changes in tastes or preferences are going to lead to a shift in the money demand that if the millennials, and I'm not sure what your generation is called, is that the I generation, Generation Z, as our generations may not have as much of a preference for living in of home ownership, that's been suggested. I'm not sure if that's true, and I think COVID is testing that, but let's assume that's true for the time being. If we have less of a taste for home ownership, then we are going to demand less credit, we're going to need to take fewer loans, and the demand for money is going to shift left, it's going to decrease. Taxes and regulations may impact that as well, similar to a private goods market. When we place a tax on a particular good, we're going to decrease the demand for that good. If we place a tax on loans, that for every, right now we're actually facing a fee, or actually it's going to be implemented in December of 2020 on home mortgage refinancing, that there were too many people which were trying to take advantage of lower interest rates on home ownership, and they requested to refinance their mortgages, and so now there's going to be a 0.5% premium placed on refinance requests due to the increase in quantity demanded in response to those interest rates. So because of that, we're thinking that that's likely going to put downward pressure on the demand for mortgage refinance requests at every interest rate, that there's going to be a lower quantity demanded of refinance requests at interest rates of 3, because now it's going to be 3.5. There's going to be fewer refinance requests at interest rates of 2, because now the rate is going to be 2.5. So once again, the taxes are going to decrease the demand for this good, and changes in entrepreneurial confidence, that if you think that the coronavirus and the government response is going to make it less likely that your restaurant is going to be successful, then yeah, you're not going to request a loan for a business loan to begin a restaurant during this time. So on the other hand, if you think that the vaccine is coming out, we're going to be able to allow full capacity in restaurants, and that rent is cheap for restaurants right now, restaurant space, then it may drive up demand. But once again, that would be in response to changes in the entrepreneurial confidence. So when we think about shifts in the money supply, we're thinking about changes in perceptions related to future welfare. Basically how much we think we need to save, that if we think that the minimum age at which you can collect Social Security is going to be raised, then we may need to save more for the future, and that is going to shift our labor supply curve outward. That is going to shift it to the right. Also, if there are changes in risk or rate of return in other markets, which are substitutes for where we can put our money, then that may impact our labor supply curve, our money supply curve as well. And it may lead us to invest less money in US-backed assets and decrease our supply of savings at every interest rate, because we can get higher interest rates abroad in Chinese markets or European markets. So once again, hopefully we can work through problems and help develop the intuition about which direction these are going to move, and whether factor is going to influence supply or demand. So as we indicated on that previous list, what factors in heavily into these market forces and whether they impact supply or demand of money is going to be intertemporal decision making, is going to be the fact that over the course of our lives, we're going to earn significantly more income when we're in the peaks of our careers than we do when we're 17 years old or when we're 80 years old and retired. However, our consumption needs really don't change too much. We still need to pay for housing, we still need to pay for food, and we need to be able to pay for things which make us happy, right? Our entertainment and our consumption. So what this curve is going to suggest is what we call consumption smoothing. So consumption smoothing shows that we have this basic pattern of our earnings over the course of our life, but that we want to keep consumption smooth. We basically have the same preferences for what we need and want to buy over the course of our lives. So, or the amount that we need to want and buy. So what does this suggest about our ability to save and our demand for credit? Well, we're going to have areas where our income is lower than our consumption, where we're going to be demanding money, where we're going to be taking out loans to buy a home, to pay for college, or where we're going to be drawing on our retirement savings. We're not actually earning that much in this period of time. We're going to be basically borrowing from our previous selves or borrowing from future generations, which are currently paying for Social Security. And we're going to have periods where we're saving. And so in the middle of our career here, I know that yellow and this orange may look similar, but this will be a saving period. And so that's largely what's going to drive our behavior in money markets. We're going to be savers at some times and requesting loans at other times. And so when we think about shifts in the supply and demand for money, we want to think about what period in our lives we're doing this and how they relate to both of these periods as well. Okay, so by now we have considered how price ceilings and price floors work in private goods markets and in labor markets. We've looked at minimum wage laws as examples of price floors and rent control as examples of price ceilings. What I want to do now is apply this price ceiling framework to a money market and think about the role of usury laws, which may result in shortages of credit. And so remember that when we implement a price ceiling, if we were to set that above the equilibrium interest rate, R0, then it's non-binding, it's ineffective. We would see the interest rate rise right to the point where the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. We have our Q star or a Q naught, and everybody's happy. There's as much credit available to people demanding loans as there are people supplying savings to the market at that interest rate. However, if we were to set our price ceiling here at RC, then what we're doing is we're separating the quantity of financial capital and money supplied and the quantity of financial capital or money which is demanded. And this makes sense. When the interest rate is 0.5%, why would you save money when you could otherwise be just enjoying that in the current time period? We have a time preference for money. Spending $100 today is going to make me happier than spending $100 in 5 years from now. However, when there's low interest rates, it makes sense to buy up as much as you can and just treat it as if there is no penalty for taking a loan, because there really isn't. That we aren't going to have to pay to have that money later, pay later to have that money now. So when that price ceiling is set below the equilibrium interest rate, and we have a greater quantity demanded than we have quantity supply, then we have a shortage of credit, and there's not going to be enough credit to go around for the people who demand it. So this is just, once again, another example about how when we have the assumptions of perfect competition met, a deviation away from unfettered markets, from just having supply and demand be unobstructed and allowed to reach their equilibrium, would be optimal. That we want to embrace the free markets when perfect competition is in effect. However, as we're going to see in next week and in the next set of videos, those assumptions are not always met, and when they are not met, then there are very different implications for government intervention, such as taxation, subsidies, or price ceilings and price floors. So with that in mind, we will see you next week. Thanks for staying tuned this week.